Reebot FM, Free Artists Radio in Berlin. This is Lautstrom. I am Anna Bromley. How do research-driven visual art practices in and with photography exchange, discuss, and present their new ways of knowing? Artists and photographers Anna Larissa Araz and Öykü Canlı provide a space for it in Istanbul. Its name is Poşe, located in the Moda neighborhood in the Anatolian side of Istanbul. The word Poşe is borrowed from French and is derived from the verb pocher, which means to mix, to poach, to sketch. In the next hour, we will explore the practices of Poşe and its makers. I'm at the Reebot studio at Akut Berlin with Poşe founders Anna Larissa Araz and Öykü Canlı. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Öykü and Larissa are artists whose work has a strong focus on the medium of photography. Both are currently based in Istanbul. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes, we live in Istanbul, traveling to Berlin. Very excited. Thanks for having us again.
Yeah, they're here in the frame of the Project Space Festival 2019 under the theme
When the Hunger Starts.
When the Hunger Starts, and you're doing an event tomorrow.
Yes.
Which has to do with food also, and with eating, and with narrations.
Exactly. It's a traditional dinner table coming from Istanbul called Çilingir Sofrası, which is like the dinner table just between, it's like aperitivo in Italians. So, but the basis drink is rakı, which solves all of the questions and talks. It's a key to a longer conversation.
Right. Let me introduce you shortly. Öykü, after you received your IB at the Koç School in Istanbul, you studied visual and media arts, including film production, post-colonial and global studies at the Emerson College in Boston and at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And Larissa, you studied media communication and culture at the New York University and then completed your studies at the Koç University in Istanbul, studying media and visual arts plus sociology.
Exactly.
Right. Interesting combination. It's the same as mine.
Yeah, really?
Yeah. Like Öykü's, also Larissa's artworks employ a variety of media, including text, video, and sound. Larissa focuses on the topics of history, identity, memory, and belonging that are included are included or not included in social memory. She does this for a very, very personal viewpoint. When looking at your work, I wondered how you both understand your methodologies of research-driven photography. That's at least the term that I would find for it. Larissa on her website describes her work as an existential research, which I found really interesting. How do you both relate to artistic research, and what are the claims of an existential or even existentialist research?
When I started my own practice, I think I didn't know that I started my own practice, and it was coming out of the questions that I already had in my mind about myself and my belonging to my family and the society and the country, after all. So this existentialism is within your own feeling and thought, so it actually leaded me to artistic practice. So I think there wasn't a decision made in the sense that, oh, I'm going to do the artistic practice, although it was totally in the other direction where you're having a problem with yourself and you try to solve it through artistic practice. That's why most of my works are about my family, or either the stories of my family. And these link to bigger societies, bigger groups. So it comes from a very personal viewpoint, I would say.
Well, when I think of research, I go back to when I started photography, because I studied film first, and then I grew apart from cinema. and then found myself in a dark room in doing photography, and I had this really traditional documentary photographer teacher, and he would quote the American photographer Gary Winogrand. I think it was his words. Research with a camera. I think that stuck with me in the sense that I started using this tool to explore or put myself in a position where I could experience or learn about anything. And that's what research means for me, actually, just doing something and going back to it, reflecting, thinking about it, really spending a long time doing and reflecting on things instead of like a more academic or theoretical research, at least in my practice. Larissa's is a much more different than mine, actually, which is the fun part of being partners in Poşe.
Exactly.
We have I think that's safe to say that research means different things to us.
Definitely.
Interesting. Larissa, you also, also wondered how does sociology play a role for you in your artistic practice?
Yeah, I mean, of course, because all of my works are about minorities, and the first thing I learned about minorities, actually the decision of studying sociology was actually coming from a minority background, because I wanted to understand myself, and with the text that has been there for many years. This doesn't apply to in Turkey most of the times because there are so many censorships, and it's not everyday life you see that or understand that. So sociology was the basis of all of the things that I started questioning in myself, and it was one of the reasons of studying sociology, actually.
And Öykü, you also have a training in post-colonial and global studies, so you also kind of combine humanities with the photographic angle.
Yeah, I had the hardest time choosing a field to study because my favorite lessons in high school and the best ones that I was in was mathematics and visual arts.
And mathematics?
Yeah. I was in a high-level class.
Nice.
Now I can't even multiply, like whatever. But we both studied the high school in Turkey, and because of the curriculum and way the system works in terms of how you enter into college, I really couldn't find the field of study that would completely satisfy me. So when I went to the US to study film, I actually I had the chance to really dive into very different areas of fields. And that study area was, it really made me understood a lot of concepts and stuff that are also happening in Turkey, but within the post-colonial perspective, when you think about them, it really like opens up your mind. So I'm glad I did that. It was very enriching.
I think also like it becomes more interdisciplinary when you study like sociology or post-colonialism. You understand something much more different and like various. And this interdisciplinary is actually something that we discuss most of the times, that in Turkey there's a lot of lacking of interdisciplinary. So it's kind of a viewpoint that it enlarges totally different point of views in one concept, in a sense.
Right. And the interdisciplinary urge is also something that you conceived Poşe
Exactly.
of, right? Yeah, let's talk about Poşe a little bit. It's a very young space. You conceived and founded it in 2018, and it's an artist-run space.
Exactly.
The neighborhood is Moda, Istanbul.
Yes.
And you describe it as an open space, a place for meeting, thinking, trying, doing, failing, rethinking, retrying, redoing, etc. You conceived it as a space for exchange, critique, and discussion. That's what you state on your website. And consequently, your website contains a video archive, which is actually has the same quantity as the project documents. That I found that really intriguing. It's an archive of talks with all the collaborators of your exhibitions and projects. Maybe I shouldn't say exhibitions, maybe it's more projects.
Yes.
You also call it projects, right?
Yeah. In our website tab, it's called projects because
we equalize everything that we do. If you were even doing a text, it's a content that has the same hierarchy as an exhibition. So even the video content is actually as important as the exhibition itself.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we try to reflect with the design of the website, to have little squares that are next to each other, and one of them is a video, one of them is an exhibition, one of them is a artist talk.
Or text.
Yeah.
So the video talks, they come across a bit more like podcasts. So they're not public talks. I want to tune in to one.
Bunlardan birçoğu tam hatalar. Çünkü gümüş değeri yüksek olduğu için ya da üzeri gümüşle kaplı ikonalara el konuyor. O yüzden bazıları mesela işte çoraplarının içine, işte bir atletin bir kenarına falan onları koyuyorlar ki alıp götürebilsinler diye. Yani bir yandan da değeri de olan bir şey. Yani zamanında mesela çok çalınan bir obje de aynı zamanda. Evet. Kiliselere ilk girildiği zaman işte çalınan şeylerden de aynı zamanda. Dolayısıyla hem bir şey değeri var. Mesela bu hikayelerden bir tanesinde de Rum bir kız, yani aslında nedense Rum olduğunu ben neden öyle düşündüm bilmiyorum ama ben öyle kendim zihnimde öyle okudum. Niye?
And now comes the part where you all laugh. So it's this was a talk with two artists or three.
Yeah, this is actually it's funny that you picked this one because this is one of my exhibitions which I did it with a friend called Öykü. And we invited Hera Büyüktaşyan. She actually has a show right now in IFA, Neither on the Ground nor in the Sky. It's a wonderful exhibition, by the way. Definitely go.
It's closing today, actually.
It's in Berlin, or
yeah.
It's in Berlin. Yes,
in IFA.
Yes, IFA.
Oh, sorry,
IFA Gallery.
And I invited her. We called balkon konuşmaları these talks, which is called actually in English balcony talks, which actually has been used in political terms. When the president has won the election, they go to a balcony talk. So we try to switch this terminology and reuse it in a totally different context so that we don't get to this terminology at all, and we're trying to resist to it. So, and this piece, the voice that you actually, the podcast you have been used here was one of the talks that we did within my exhibition, and we were talking about the material within the exhibition itself with Hera. She also used that material with different work. So yeah, it was a very fun talk, and it's very informal in the sense that we try to break that formal language in museums, institutions. So we try to make fun because it's a non-profit space, and we do this for our own benefit. Actually, yeah.
Well, the starting point of this balcony talks was that we actually see the exhibitions that are happening in the space not as an ending point of an artistic process that's driven between different cultural partner agents, but that it's actually a point of the beginning of a conversation point. So the balcony talks are literally that in a video, that the fact that in each balcony talks, the artists who made the artist or the artists who make those exhibitions, they choose themselves whoever they want to speak with. And for example, this I think this was how you actually met with Hera, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so it became like a nice reason to connect with Hera and to invite
With
her to the
people,
space. And this happens all the time with Poşe, and it's one of the great things about it. It becomes literally a reason and an excuse for people to meet and talk. And we try to make this visible via videos or public talks or public events. That's the really fun part, I think.
Wow, interesting. So the talks you produce these talks when the exhibition is up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're like an extension or expanding the themes and the questions raised
Exactly,
in the
yeah.
exhibitions.
Yeah, we try to make it just before the closing so that it will be like one of the continuation of the exhibition itself. And actually it started from, because we had a balcony in our space, so we used to do it there, and then winter came, so we got it inside actually. It's, yeah.
Yeah. Hey, this is Anna Bromley speaking. It's Lautstrom on Reebot FM. My studio guests today are Anna Larissa Araz and Öykü Canlı, who run the artist-run space Poşe in Istanbul. We are zooming a bit in their projects and their concept and practices. And many of the Poşe projects foster collaborations that are concerned with issues of the critique of politics of space, I noticed. I noticed that some of them also involve metaphors from biotechnological research. So one of the latest, or the latest show was called Next Blood is Just a Fresh One. And a project in spring was called Orthopedics. And when reading into the project, they seem to deal with politics of space, geopolitics, and geophilosophy. So I read a small excerpt of your text for Orthopedics. The fixation of enlightenment and modernity with grasping the truth has encouraged professional experts like doctors, educators, and urban planners to perform orthopedic interventions over individuals and society. Throughout the history of colonialism, these intervention systems have expanded by claiming universality, and they have been instrumental in legitimizing invasion and exploitation. Our hope is to collectively observe the traces of orthopedic interventions made on different parts of society to be able to share diverse forms of victimhood without competing. We unanimously agree to keep our conceptual foundations away from canonical opinion leaders and close to our hearts. This is why, instead of reciting fanciful theories by the Habermases and Derridas of this world, we want to bring into being creative production processes which take our own existence as reference point. I'm very intrigued by the mix of metaphors that derive from biotechnology and reflection of space making. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, now that you mentioned, I can see the huge coincidence that those two projects came back to back actually. And before that, the notations show actually had some maybe crumbs that were leading up to this, I now realize. Well, the text you read, the curator of the orthopedics show, Efe Levent, he's a trained anthropologist living in Turkey, and he actually runs a website called Mangal Media, and he came to us with this project. It was something that was on his mind, and he had this concept ready, and it was going to be his first time curating, and he he had this like nice idea of bringing together artists. Some of them we had already known. And then we had already been working with Cem Örgen, the artist of The Next Blood is Just a Fresh One, since last autumn actually. His process was really quite different. The thing that we should say is, as Poşe, we don't, or maybe we have some tendencies and issues that we are more attracted to, or media. Photography is one of them, because we both come from a photography background. But we always question everything and try to go beyond in personally or, culturally, or that beyond may mean different things for each one of us. What in the sense that what attracted us in these two projects was that both Efe and Cem were taking something simple, like one, the concept of orthopedics, and the other, this Cem is a bit different because he really came to the space and worked through it. But both were thinking about, both were aware of the city they live in, the daily life, the space each one of us lives in, the space we produce in, the space we breathe in and live. So for me, that's the simple connection. I wouldn't be able to comment on the biotechnology part.
But also, I would add that society too. I mean, both of the exhibitions were working with society, and they were taking a totally different perspective in the sense. And well, in orthopedics, I would say maybe we can talk about Merve Ünsal's work, because it actually changed in the sense that in some of the exhibitions we have permanent works that are being installed in the space. These are very, very tiny little details that the artists leave after their show, and these stay there all the time. We have in our Large Meadow exhibition, we have a tent outside in our balcony that was done by İnci Furni. And in this one, in orthopedics, Merve Ünsal did have softened a corner, and it was talking about how an art space, how an art initiative can change the perspective of the neighborhood, and it can be seen from outside, because on the wall it's all white. You cannot see it's softened. It's also seemed like cornered, but it changes in a very invisible way. So these are the things that we're so attached to, actually. And also in Cem's exhibition, Cem actually did a work that actually talks about the space calling I'm talking about moda, and how the generation is now moving to moda to have a different a more free zone in their lives. Although it changes totally the neighborhood, it gentrifies, and this is what actually Cem was talking about in his exhibition. This was like the broader theme, let's say. So again, it's also talking about like the streets and also the current situation in the society, how the blood is always changing, like the next generation is always pumping, but it's just the fresh one. So it's not new, it's just fresh.
Yeah, interesting. I wanted to ask you this question also, how the moda, what role does moda, the neighborhood where you're in, plays for the space?
Well, Öykü is living in moda since you were born, I guess, right?
Yes, for me, moda is home, but for the art scene, moda is actually the periphery. And that's what I personally actually like about moda, that the fact that it's not in Taksim or Tophane, the most known places you would go to do some art spacing. Moda is a neighborhood that's like a sort of like, it has a feeling of a resort town. People go there to eat ice cream.
Yeah, it's kind of and it used to be the summer houses were there, and then it became a Levantine quarter, where we call Levantines to the Europeans that have moved to Turkey in like 40s, 30s. Although Levantine is called to the southern Mediterranean, anyways. But yeah, they have the houses and the street-wise, it's totally I would say it doesn't look like Istanbul at all.
Yeah, we have a tram that passes, the second functioning historical tram in Istanbul, besides the one in Istiklal Street at Taksim Square. So if you came to Poşe, literally this is what most of our visitors say. The tram passes, there is a church nearby, the bell tolls, and everyone says it
This
doesn't
is Lisbon.
feel like Istanbul at all. It feels like Lisbon. And Cem is actually playing with this exoticization, which is also really interesting to me as a side note. But it's an exotic place that's still in Istanbul. That's also my home. So I'm much more biased to moda because it's just like moda for me. But the thing is, we have a really niche visitor group, I think, because it's not a place that you can just randomly walk into. You either have to make plans for it, or maybe you heard it via like word of mouth, or maybe you saw it, or maybe you live in the area and you saw like news in the local news outlets. Those are how, like, that three category is how most people actually come to Poşe. And the third one is actually very surprising to me. I always feel really surprised and glad when someone just walks in and says, my friend like suggested that I come here, or I saw your news like on like a newspaper.
But we can also talk about like how moda is gentrified a lot. Most of the people who have been scared from Taksim after all of the bombings that happened in 2016 and 2017, they all moved to Kadıköy, and now it's forming totally a different group of people, and which actually also feeds us in the sense that audience-wise.
Right. Hey, let's listen to a bit of music now before we go on talking about Poşe. It's Lautstrom FM live on Lautstrom live on Reebot FM. I'm Anna Bromley. My studio guests today are Anna Larissa Araz and Öykü Canlı of Poşe, Istanbul. At the beginning, you listened to a track of Khwangbin, and now I'm going to play a bit of Tash Sultana from her 2016 album Notion. It's Lautstrom live on Reebot FM. I'm Anna Bromley. I have Anna Larissa Araz and Öykü Canlı in the studio today, the two founders and conceivers of Poşe, an artist-run space in Istanbul. We talk about all the projects and perspectives of the Poşe practice, and you also conceived, or I don't know if you conceived or hosted, actually a project on photo signs. 6 different photo signs produced by 16 artists have been published in the same format under the collaboration of Fail Books and Fabrika Zine. And it's a limited edition. They were showcased last autumn in Poşe, at Poşe. And how far do you understand Poşe as an infrastructure for the production of different publications or publication forms or practices?
That event was we actually hosted it, and by hosting it, we realized that we definitely want to go into publication. Larissa here has actually a special interest in the magazines.
Yeah, I have a collection of magazines actually.
And sometimes we like fantasize about, maybe Poşe should have a magazine, or but that's it's safe to say that with that event we realized that we actually it would be really great if we became a small hub of artist-made publications, books, zines, magazines. Right now we have a small collection, and we're always trying to add more and more publications to it. There are really nice places in Istanbul who does that actually, but there are no places left in Kadıköy, in the Anatolian side where we are. So we're thinking we might become like the flagship place of artist books. Actually, with the orthopedics exhibition, Efe had this idea of doing a publication from scratch, and we made a newspaper called Guide to Every City.
With Allah Al-Hasun.
Yes, with the drawer and painter Ala Al-Hasun. He drew the images that were also exhibited in the orthopedics, and Efe wrote the fictional guidebook texts. And that was our first publication as Poşe. That was the concept we worked with together with Efe. The design we did.
Öykü did, I would say. Yeah, but I was just thinking while we were talking. I think we're having, like, when we opened Poşe, we always discussed about visibility, and as a space we try to have new exhibitions of new artists, actually young artists mostly, but we don't tag it with it. And also book can be a visibility point too. Although we have paper crisis going on in Turkey, the paper prices are going too high, and there's an economical crisis that nobody talks about. So we changed it to exhibition making too. But there is like this urge in us, and I think it comes from making a content which actually either it's in a space or it's on a paper or it's on a visual. It's going to be the same solid content heaviness in it. So that's why I think we're just like very attached to publications and all.
Yes, I agree.
As you both share this strong photographic background, and it's also, I must say, an amazingly skilled photographic background, as I saw on your works, on your websites. I wondered what influence language-related practices or even languages themselves play in this mixing or approaching of different perspectives and methodologies.
I mean, I would say that we're living in a totally different world in Turkey, I would say. We have a lot of censorship going on, and beyond image, there are things that you want to share. Even image making is problematic. Most of our friends who are wood photojournalists got into jails because they were on the wrong place, wrong time. And afterwards, you understand that these words that you have been picked and used in daily life, it changes. And we were thinking of, even with the balcony talks, we were thinking of how can we change this in a very 1984 perspective. Maybe we can call this to a totally different thing. Maybe it can make a difference in the sense that we don't understand that word in a negative form. And since we got actually opened, we got 6 different elections happening in 1 year or so. So yeah, so I think personally, I would say that image making, after all, didn't satisfy me in a sense, and I think this comes for you too, Öykü, right?
Well, I still believe in photography, whatever that means. But
it's like a love song right now.
But it's of course we're very aware about like image politics, and that an image in itself doesn't actually say anything, that there must be context, those like super simple stuff. The way I started to think about language, besides the fact that there's this idea that photography itself can be a language that you can really start to design it in a way so that maybe throughout your whole life you will be in pursuit of a new photographic language. This is like a super high aspiration as an artist or photographer. But in my works, what I'm trying to do step by step is to first really understand from a personal perspective that includes family and memory in a way that's really actually very different than how Larissa uses it. To combine memory and photography with language, with spoken word, is something I attempted to do as a experiment.
Yeah, it's interesting how most of the Poşe art projects draw on conceptualist and post-conceptualist methodologies. And in a way, the choosing of the term, the name Poşe is such one, because you derive this word from French, to poché, means like poached eggs mixing, and poaching and sketching. And I am also really intrigued because it seems to me that you also provide space for new ways of knowing, as the artist and research theorist Barbara Bolt calls it. She says that artists, or research-driven arts provide new ways of knowing. And it seems to me that the forms and modes of presentations that you create actually respond to these new forms of knowing, and also your personal, like your individual works do that, and they resound really well on each other, as I've seen on your websites. Öykü, after you returned from Turkey, or to Turkey from Boston, that was 2015, you started working on the large format camera photo series My Motherland, and you also mentioned that you deal a lot with your family history or genealogy. The series contemplates about exactly that. You mix interior photography, portraits with urban and landscape photography. I saw a lot of semi-transparent curtains on the photos, and also other semi-transparent materials and like in headscarves and plastic bags. I wondered, how does semi-transparency relate with your research on the loss of one's sense of belonging, as you stated, and on the feelings of being trapped and stagnant?
That semi-transparency and curtain and also plants life, those are actually quite nice observations, so thank you. Well, I think I was literally trying to find out or come up with an answer as to who am I and what am I doing here, and here meaning Turkey. The beginning of that series, I had come back to Turkey willingly, because I hadn't lived as an adult in Turkey, and I wanted to have that experience, whether it be good or bad. And the thing is, Turkey is not so bad, but everything is a little bit difficult, like on a daily basis. And that I had totally forgotten living in Boston. It's a very simple thing, but it actually clouds your judgment and maybe creates these complex things in your mind about what is truth, what is family, what is roots, who am I, who are these people. Really simple questions. I think that for me, trying to look at outside from the inside and being in a house, because I would spend a lot of time living with my grandparents throughout that series, and I would on purpose not go outside. And once you're inside in that sort of like a space where old people live, you start to enter a world of your own. So I think that was also a weird experiment that I did to myself, and now I actually can't think of going back there and like living there for 3 weeks and not going out at all. It sounds really scary.
It sounds depression.
Yes.
Is this series going on still, or did you actually close it?
I stopped taking the photographs. I started doing another series in Ankara, this time with my cousins, and it's a similar story that's going on like in a house and then both outside the house. There are still traces of that series in it. In short, what I'm trying to say is I stopped taking photographs, but somehow the series is still on my mind as I see new meanings in it, or as I think about how I would exhibit it, or what more it can say after like 2-3 years after I made it, because that's also really fun to look back at what you did after a certain amount of time. Yeah.
Yeah, Larissa, you also work a lot with the politics of space, territory, I would say, like making territory, and the imaginations which are involved in it. It also takes this very existential turn, like in Öyky's, like I see it in Öyky's work. You made a photo series which is called Dear Julia, and it revolves around an at first mysterious letter written from Julia to Julia. And now you have to help me. It sounds a bit the same when you speak it.
It's the same.
It's the same. Just it's written very differently. Julia, it's with an H.
Well, yeah, the story comes from, in most of the minorities in Turkey, they put a Turkish name next to their identity name, whether it's Armenian or Greek or Jewish name. They put a Turkish name so that the authorities won't bother them. So this mysterious letter is actually sent from the Turkish name to the identity name. They're both the same person, but they live in two different identity. It's a fictional letter, but although the letter doesn't reveal that, now I'm revealing it, and I'm revealing the joke of it. It's not a joke though. But yeah, all of my family has two names. Although because I'm not gonna go into the military service, they didn't put me in a Turkish name. So most of the guys, males, have it.
So the Turkish names are connected to military service?
To authority, I would say. Most of the stuff, because it's a very male-dominant society, Turkish society. So they would say that all of the like authoritarian stuff goes through male workload. So, and also military, of course, too. I mean... that's another issue, that there's a like obligatory military service in Turkey, and they have a lot of problems. Even my like brothers have already raised their identity name. We only call them their identity name within the family, but not outside of the family. So yeah, the story comes from there. And the work is about an island also has two names, which has been changed in 1974. It was a Greek island, but after the big emigration within Turkey and Greece in 1923, and after that in 1955, the authorities in Turkey have changed its name from Greek name from Imros to Gökçeada. And there's when you go to this island, I was so shocked when I see that you can see the identity within the island, just like you can see it in a person. In a person, you can maybe understand from the accent or like some way of doing it, but in an island, it's like everywhere. The architectural sense, the melancholy of the island is actually revealing the old identity and the new identity that comes on top of it.
Right. And can you describe how do you photographic methods? So how do you apply them when you enter or deal with the island?
Yeah. Well, I'm coming from a photojournalistic background as Öykü too, and all of my first series that I worked on were very... the image making was very photojournalistic, and it was coming with the story. But after a certain point, I think it also is about how Turkey is starting out to be. It's a fictional story in my sense. I started using this photojournalistic background in a like a fictional photojournalism in a sense. So, and this one, Dear Julia, and also the soil that the soil you tread on, is actually using this photojournalistic perspective and trying to create a story that is there, but it's not solid. So it's way of making it solid in a way.
Mm. You also really question the idea of mapping, of archiving but you also provide archives in your work.
Yeah, actually, all of these problems are there, and most of the problems that I deal with within my artistic research, I would say, are not being talked. And maybe I can give the example in The Soil That I Tread On. The Soil You Tread On is actually about a fictional archive about labor battalions in the First World War in Turkey. Mm-hmm. And the files are missing. You cannot reach from all. If you reach it in the official documents, it's not visible, or it's not stated that it happened, although you can find it from other resources that there have been labor battalions, and they actually link to Armenian genocide after all. So most of the people who went to these labor battalions were killed, and because this was been hidden in Turkish official history, I tried to create a fictional archive that's stating it is there through a book from Dido Soteriou, the writer. It's a diary of a soldier who went to these battalions, and although this book has been called a semi-fictional, you cannot decide which part of it is fictional or which part of it is non-fictional. So the archive stands on that, and even this question of what is real or what is happening is the main basis of the archive itself.
Right, so semi-fictional would be a term that you're interested in, like checking out or going on with.
Exactly. I think most of the stuff that I use semi-fictional are actually non-fictional, though. I mean, using it semi-fictional is making it non-fiction, I would say.
Yeah.
It's a bit confusing, though, yeah.
Non-fiction, fiction.
Yeah.
You also do it a bit like that, Öykü, just with a very different focus. You had this work with your father, and you need to help me with pronouncing the title because I can't.
It's in Turkish. It's sonsuza kadar ödünç, borrowed forever.
Borrowed forever.
In English, yeah.
Yeah, it's the result of a process that you started by asking questions while looking at your father's lost photograph. So it's a family photo album, and you recorded a conversation with him, and you were also both photographed while doing that, and you had made an installation from it just with frames and then the old photos. And I must admit that I didn't see the new photos. Can you describe a bit of this?
Sure. The photographs themselves as an object in the family archives, I started to think about when I had been in Turkey after Boston for a while. And the thing is, in our house, there are no photographs of my father in the family albums. And when I asked him that, he solemnly said, something happened to them. I don't want to talk about it. So the idea came that he had actually, because of, he has a theory, my mom has a theory, the family has a theory, and I don't want to blame anyone. So the fact that those photographs didn't exist and there was a anticipation of them, just being there, I wanted to have a conversation with him. And then he had actually started to collect his own photographs from other family members. And I was showing them those photographs to really try to help him remember what happened. And then I had a camera throughout this conversation that I was recording. He's looking at the photographs, describing, going back to his whatever childhood. I photographed him, and at one point he took the camera himself and started photographing me. Because he remembered the story about working as a photographer at some point. It was like a regular daughter-father time, but having a conversation about missing photographs. And it's actually it's not even a work maybe, but a gesture or an attempt to find about something that may or may not have happened, or the question, or that feeling of you might actually never know what has happened in the past. And the only way to talk about the past is to talk about it, in a way.
Open a dialogue with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You also played this dialogue when you showed the work, and it was in a interesting context which was called photography without photographing.
Yes.
As I remember.
Yeah.
That's an interesting approach.
Yeah, it was, I started making that work in a workshop with SALT in Ankara and GAPO, an organization in Istanbul. And at the end of that the theme was photography without taking photography. So that workshop was also about working with photographs as objects rather than taking photographs. And at the end of that workshop in SALT Ankara, which is now closed, unfortunately, the exhibition space, there was an exhibition, and the photographs and the sound were played, were included in the installation there.
Yeah, we are running out of time, unfortunately. I have to make my concluding question. Poşe seems to be a place for pluralistic concept of research output, including exhibitions, performances, artwork, artistic interventions. What's next? What's next at Poşe, and which are the potential allies that you want to reach out?
Last spring we started doing a research about who we are, the same practice that we did in our own personal practices, and we're trying to find out who is our audience and why initiatives are taking place in Turkey right now when everything is seeming very demoralized and very gloomy. So our next season is about this workshop.
Okay, you listen to Lautstrom on Reebot FM. We were live in the studio. My guests today were the artists Anna Larissa Araz and Öykü Canlı. In the last 60 minutes, they elaborated on their artistic run space Poşe in Istanbul and its unconventional practice and projects. You can see them tomorrow at Project Space Festival 2019 when the hunger starts. Check out on the website where it is. It is in Kreuzberg. See you next time. Hear you next time. Bye bye.